Hello, everyone. So happy you're all here today. Welcome to this amazing panel with those amazing guests. They will be introduced shortly. First of all, I want to thank Filmnetzwerk Berlin for supporting this event. Is there someone here from Filmnetzwerk? I haven't seen anyone. Okay, so anyways, thank you to Filmnetzwerk for supporting this event. Our moderator today is Ricardo Brunn. He is a programmer and film journalist, and he will take over this panel from now on. So I wish you a lot of fun, and yeah, enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayla, for letting me take over this panel. So I'm going to guide you through all of you. That means I'm including you. As you know, the topic of this panel is whose story do we tell? And the first thing, of course, that I thought was, what does that mean? What is whose and who is we? What's the perspective here? Is it a perspective from the festival, we as a festival, whose story do we tell? Or is the perspective from the filmmakers? So that's one thing. I already got confused starting my research. And this will be one of the topics, of course, because there are relationships of power within the film industry. And it's a very interesting and very complex thing to talk about who decides what stories can be told. I'm very honored to have three wonderful guests. I will start by introducing them, and we will start with João Pedro Prado. He's a filmmaker born in Sao Paulo. He graduated in philosophy and film studies at the Free University here in Berlin and studied audiovisual media at the University of Sao Paulo. Currently, he's pursuing his master's degree in documentary film directing at the Film University in Babelsberg, just around the corner. Between 2018 and 2021, he was a student assistant at the Cinepoetics project, Effective Rhetorics and of the Audiovisual. It's a very interesting thing these Cinepoetics are doing, exploring cinematic language and stuff. And there's often once a month, I think there's panels for this. In 2020, his short documentary Patriots Don't Die, which dissects the protests by Bolsonaro supporters in his hometown, won a prize at the Storie Parallele in Italy and was screened in German festivals in Films Mainz and in Filmfest Dresden. And in his latest short film, Oh, How Free is Panama, he portrays a German anti-vax influencer, and it's set to premiere in 2022. This sounds very interesting. We'll talk about this later on. Then we have Çiğdem. Welcome. She's a producer and journalist, studied film and received her master's degree on communication science from the Marmara University. Between 1997 and 2005, she worked as a translator, correspondent, and producer for ABC News, Boston Globe, Sky News, Radio France, Arte, and Los Angeles Times, and others. And from 2004 to 2009, she was the coordinator for the Anadolu Kultur, an NGO based in Istanbul, focused on projects in culture and arts in Anatolian cities and as well as the neighboring countries, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Iran, Iraq. Since 2010, she produces documentaries and feature films within her own company, Red Film. You also worked as a line producer for Ai Weiwei's The Human Flow. And since 2009, she's founding coordinator for the Armenian-Turkish cinema platform that aims to support and co-production between Turkey and Armenia. Very interesting. I think that's a topic we can also dive in. And she produced Letters from Silivri by Adrian Figuera, which is screened here at Interfilm in the German competition. And last but not least, we have Noémi Varga. She's a London-based filmmaker, graduated at the Royal College of Art, where she specialized in the moving image. Her graduation film, The Happiest Barrack, premiered in Rotterdam and is also screened here at Interfilm in the focus on Hungary. Her latest short film, And It Was the Same with My Son, about a British Muslim mother who lost her son to radicalization, was commissioned by Film London, and it premiered at the Sheffield Doc Fest last year. And her previous films have also been screened in Rotterdam or the Underwire Film Festival and others. So welcome, thanks for coming, thanks for joining this panel. I will start by looking at your own field of work, the things you do, the topics and the themes you choose for your films or the films you would like to produce, and then explore this field that I was briefly mentioning. Whose story are we telling? What's possible? What is invisible for us? So, oh, there's one thing I missed. Before we start with that, there was planned to have a fourth panelist here. It's Akosua Amponsah, but she didn't make it. So unfortunately, there's one seat empty, but this seat can be filled with you. Because of course we want to invite you to ask questions or to comment on this topic as well. So in the first 30 minutes while I'm talking to you about your projects, you can think about this question: whose story do we tell? What's the thing maybe you miss? So let's start with the first question. I would like to know, maybe let's start with João. How do you choose the topics and themes for your projects? What guides you in this process?
Cool. Thank you all for coming. Yeah, and thank you for the invitation. I don't know, I mean, how do we, as filmmakers, kind of decide what is it that we're going to shoot? I think for me, it's very, and that's what I like about documentary. It's always coming from a desire to understand something, right? To come closer, to touch, to deal with a topic, to dive into. And it's usually, I'm more interested in making films about something that I sometimes know nothing of and want to understand or have a hard time grasping what it is than to something that I already have a preconceived idea what it is, and I just want to make a film to illustrate it, basically. And so, in this case, with this short film that I shot in Brazil, just in the brink of Corona, I wanted to understand, okay, what's like, you know, these people that we're dealing it, that we're seeing in the media, and that are, you know, bringing the country to the brink of destruction, like, you know, all the Bolsonaro supporters and stuff like this, like the far right. They are so, in a way, they're so far from my reality and how I think, and that it started with, okay, I wanted to understand what makes these people tick somehow. Like, I wanted to get closer, and of course, that is. I think there is a limit as to, like, this is a film that we shot only one day during Rome protests. Like, we were the whole day there and just kind of trying to see how, you know, what are these people going to do? What is going to be their ritual of how are they going to react to the pandemic, because it already started in Europe and Italy that week, and then still they were going on streets to deny the existence of it. So I wanted to try just to understand. I was curious to see, okay, how are they going to react to it? But at the same time, there's this unsurmountable distance between me as a filmmaker and them, their filming, which was not able to overcome in only one day. And I think that's also one nice thing about documentaries, that usually the longer you are in this process, I think the more possible it becomes to overcome this distance between filmmaker and film person, between, let's say, the subject that you're dealing with. And that's something I learned in this latest short documentary that I did, the Panama one, about, which is also my first German, like my first documentary, my first film in German language, which was about this influencer who is anti-vax and doesn't believe in Corona and decides she wants to leave Germany for good. And then it took me 5 months to get her trust, basically, to be able to do this film, right? And there was like a whole process of talking, of coming closer, and trying to see, okay, where are the points in which we're actually not that different? Where can we actually find points? And so it was building, and a relationship until the point in which she would accept. It was like, okay, like, I'll do this film. I trust you enough to do it. And so again, just to come back to it, I think for me it's always an attempt to try to understand something that is really out of my comfort zone, out of my reality, and at the same time, this is actually like to be able to do this properly. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work, and a lot of, like, getting out of your comfort zone is actually it's a hard job, yeah. And that's how I see documentary, as trying to bring me always out of the zone.
Now, Çiğdem, you have been working as a journalist for a very long time. I wouldn't just repeat the question, how do you choose projects, especially for producing, but I would like to add something. Do you think that there's topics that kind of come in waves and others kind of are not told? How is that also something that influences you in choosing what project you want to do or can do? Also in regards to a political system and funding situations.
Well, I'm the only one who is here who doesn't normally decide what's we're gonna see on the screen, because in the film business that I'm in, especially in the art house, is that this is the director who decides. So I'm the second person who decides to be on board or not, which gives you a kind of a chance that you can understand the topic better, maybe, as you are on the board later on, the director. But yes, as I'm coming from journalism, I may say that I'm looking to the world, especially because of the place that I'm coming from Middle East, so I'm looking to the subjects on a more political ways, usually. But how I choose my directors / films is mostly how I say this is like, it's a kind of a love relationship. So it's a Catholic marriage. You cannot divorce because you have a baby at the end. So the director that you are choosing should not be your best friend, but should be someone that you can spend your life with. As at the end, you're going to have a baby. So the relationship between the producer and the director is a tough relation. So sometimes, although I love the subject a lot, when I see that the director is not that much someone that I like, so that I may say no. Because it's a relation, I mean, even if I, for example, a film that I did like 10 years ago, I still have the relation with the director because the film is still there. So I should continue this relationship. So that's my relation with the directors. But my relation with the subject is always like, I should enjoy or learn or love to investigate, love to dig, and to understand, like, it's not like, I mean, we are not curing Corona. We are just doing films. But at the end, it should enjoy people when they watched on the movie theater. So I always believe that there are 3 parts in the filmmaking. They're us, producer, director, the team, protagonist, and the ones who are doing the films, the protagonists, if you are on the documentary, and the audience. Which I believe is that the most important part is to create the, let's say, kind of a common ground between these 3 parts. And the audience part also includes, of course, the finance and the festivals And so that for me, my position is to create a kind of a, balance between all this triangle, and to be able to see with the audience, with the festivals, with the founders, with the protagonists and the directors, something that we really enjoy at the end on the screen. It's not always the case, of course. I'm not happy with all the films that I did, but I learned a lot from all of them. And sometimes it's important to learning instead of having great films. So that's how I look generally.
Looking at the topic we have on this panel, I would be interested in you as a producer. You get in touch with other producers. You're constantly in touch with film funds. And I also have been producing films several years ago in a production company in Germany. And what I realized back
And how
then...
did you save yourself?
How did I save myself? Oh, if you want to get personal...
How did you survive?
If you want to get that personal, I can tell you I saved myself by having a burnout and leaving the company. Because of course, filmmaking is not fun. It's a hard job, and people suffer.
I need more clues on this. Okay.
Yeah, just work even harder. Get kids. That's also important.
Okay.
That's really important, so that you have two things to care about. But it's not about me. How did we end up here? What I wanted to say was, I back then realized that there's topics that choose, or there's topics and there's filmmakers that choose these topics, but there's also the producers who are in a way limited because through media, for example, there are topics that are floating on top, and the funds, I had the feeling back then, are following that in a way. So in a way, you're limited in choosing topics. Is that something you experience?
Of course I do. I mean, even when I look at to my film career and to my films, especially on the documentary part, because although feature films are more difficult to be done, you are kind of more free regarding the fundings, regarding the festivals, etc. But when it comes to the documentary, when I look at to my personal filmography, I'm seeing since 2012, the documentaries that I was involved are mostly about the Syrian war and the refugee issue, because that was the hot topic. So it was easy to support, it was easy to find finance, it was easy to tell to the world what you are doing. And for example, of course, Ai Weiwei is a kind of an extra example. I mean, it's like extraordinary part because he has the name and it's very easy for him to fund such a film. And Human Flow was shot in 26 countries for months and months. I did the production for Turkey's part, which they came, I mean, that was a kind of an extraordinary experience for me as well, because they decided to come to Turkey only to shoot for 10 days. And I mean, we are all filmmakers, right? I mean, it's just like we know how difficult is funding a film. They came for 10 days and we shot for 3 months because they had this unlimited budget. And we had, I mean, at some point I was running the whole production, and at some point I realized that I even don't know how many crews I have in all over Turkey. Because it was like, this is interesting, send 2 people. This is interesting, send 3 people. And Ai Weiwei is working only with Chinese people, which comes, they don't speak English. And of course, they don't speak Turkish either. So at some point, I found myself that I knew every single person in Turkey who speaks Chinese, which has 4 dialects. So I was just looking around the Chinese restaurants in Istanbul, trying to find bilingual people speaking Chinese and Turkish Chinese or English, etc. And we had, I think, on the locations in total, like more than 100 people. And shooting started with 10 people, with 10 days, ended in 2.5 months. So you may have this kind of extraordinary journeys as well, but normally this is not the case. So you have to find a subject that you can kind of explain to the funds and the festivals that this is really important, although this is not like so hot topic. Or you may even kind of speculate some things like, this may seems like a children film, but actually it's a refugee story, so that you can get funds. But yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy. And if you are not, for example, I mean, when you are in the beginning of the 2000s, Iran was a hot topic, and everything regarding with Iran, connected with Iran was funded. Then Balkans became, and then Turkey was at one point. Now Afghans are on the back, are on the scene back, and people are just like struggling around this subject to convince people that my story is important as well, although it's not about a little girl from Afghanistan trying to flow to Europe. So yeah, producers and directors are facing so much difficulties regarding the funding, and they to try to be on the hot topic list of this year. So, and it changed a lot. It's like we've been talking before the panel, like it's like Paris Fashion Week this year is high heels are on the mood, and if are on the fashion weeks, and next year it will be only the sneakers. So you never know. Yeah.
Talking about funding, Noémi, you have been graduating with the film The Happiest Barrack, which is screened here, and then you moved on to do another short film. But once you leave the university, you're out there, and you have to kind of get along, because suddenly you're just like any other filmmaker out there. It doesn't matter if you have 50 years of experience or if you're a starter. The same rules apply all of a sudden. And the films you do, they're very, very special, because you don't do the typical kind of standardized documentary in terms of you have talking heads and they tell a story. You go in a totally different direction, because you kind of invent the visuals for what these people are telling you, which is absolutely fascinating. But what does that mean for you, doing this kind of a very special documentary in terms of funding and convincing people how this may look like, what the result might be, and convince them to do this with you?
Yeah. So, hello everyone. First of all, I wanted to say it's so nice to be back in a room with other filmmakers, and, you know, not to be online, although that's nice too, but not quite as nice. So yeah, I guess it has a lot to do with my background as well, because originally I'm from Budapest, where I was born, and then I did my BA there in art theory. And then eventually, when I graduated, I decided to move to London because during my BA, I took an off like film history courses, particularly like experimental film history, and I was really touched by the work of Derek Jarman, who's a, I think one of the greatest British filmmakers ever been, and so then I moved to the UK because I thought I want to pursue an education that's a bit more experimental. And actually yesterday I was with my friends, we're also directors, and they went to more like traditional film schools, and we were just comparing our experiences because their mode of study was like so structured. And like for us, when I was doing my MA, they just got together like a really diverse and like slightly loopy group of people. And then it was almost like a human experiment because they were like, okay, so we just leave you to it for 2 years and see you in 2016 when you graduate. And there was like great freedom in that. And I think that really informed my approach. But then there's also serendipity, which is, sometimes things happen by accident, and then it just kind of becomes a thing. So what happened is when I was making my graduation film at the Royal College of Art called The Happiest Barrack, which is now here in Interfilm, also screening tomorrow at 6 p.m. I was recording. I have this like instinct when like there's something that draws me to a topic and I start to explore it without having really any agenda. So I started to, there's this joke that like every time a filmmaking student graduates, they either make something about their country or their family. And there's like, so I decided to do something about both. So I started interviewing my mom, which was like a very straight on, like on camera interview, but then the card got corrupted. So I lost the video and I was left with the audio. And I was like, damn, like I have to make a film in 2 months. What am I gonna do? So what happened is that the audio became like the documentary core of this film. And then the visuals they were entirely like reenacted or reenactment based. And I just wanted it to feel like a really bad dream. So I just went with that instinct again. And I felt that this way, the visuals add like an extra layer of meaning. But they call them like the so-called creative documentaries. They're not always so easy to get funding for. I was very lucky that within a year, I made another documentary that was fairly experimental, which was also here in Intel Film in 2019, which was actually my last festival before the pandemic. It's weird, anyhow. And then I think it also kind of like form follows function, right? So I tried to make this decision based on like serving my subject, and this second short film called And It Was the Same with My Son, which now you can watch on The Atlantic, which is an American newspaper. So it was about the radicalization of a young British boy, and it's told from the mother's perspective. And then I made a very conscious effort not to re-traumatize her. So this is why we decided to use reenactment, because I think it's especially important to be mindful of your subject's welfare in documentary. And then I went on and started developing my first feature, which is also a creative documentary that slowly turned into a fiction film due to various complications around the subject and like access and so on. And now I'm kind of developing fiction films by accident, because but I also make documentaries for platforms and museums and so on. So I think it's funny, because for me, I feel like it's more like there are certain themes I want to explore. Like right now, I'm really interested, because there's so many films about men's experience of war, but there's not so many about women's experience, and I'm really interested about that because the stories I heard from my grandma, and then of course it took part in such a long time ago, and I feel like the kind of films I want to make, they always have this like sort of like elevated or like dreamlike or supernatural element almost. So I now would be really curious to explore the fiction form.
That's an interesting point that you make. Did you say, "Oh, there's so many films about men's perspective on war, but there's this gap"? I would like to know from all of you: is that always something, or often something that also influences what you are working on as a journalist, for example, or as a filmmaker, producer? That you kind of check out the bandwidth of what actually is done, and then see, oh, there's something missing. For example, when I started writing about film, the only reason really was that I was constantly reading film critiques thinking, there's I don't see myself, I don't see what I saw in this film. So I thought, let's write it down. I'm not saying I'm filling a gap, and so completely different thing compared to the topics you're touching, but just as a starting point or a comparison, is that something that influences you in choosing your topics, seeing that there's gaps? João, come.
I don't know. That's a good question. I think none of us would like to admit that. Or like this. No one would like us as artists to know or to have to be told that okay, we're just doing what everyone else is doing. Like it'll be very frustrating. So I guess we all would like to believe that we're doing something that no one else is doing, and that we're kind of aiming for that. So that's why I think it's just a hard question. But it's not very. It's not necessarily always. I don't know. In the process, yes, I would like to. Okay, I think before. There's two ways you can think of it, right? You can think of it as I want to do something that no one else is doing, or I want to do something that I haven't done yet, right? This also happens quite a lot. And then I think like we're best entitled to talk about our own examples. And then this latest short doc, I wanted to try something that I had never done a documentary for the first time. I was like, okay, what happens if I'm also in front of the camera? Like, what if I try playing Michael Moore to see if it, if it works? And then it's debatable if it did work or not. But it's just something I wanted to try. I wanted to have this experience. I wanted to challenge myself to do so. So I think, and that's usually what I'm orienting myself more to, because I think none of us wants to have, I don't know, you can also talk about the films you're producing, but yeah, I mean, at one point it also just grows tired. Also, if you just like going, it's this thing is also having films being screened at festivals, going to panels, and then at one point you realize you're just repeating yourself and saying just like over and over again, and you just become tired of yourself as well. And it's like, no, I need to, I need to change. I need to go in another direction. So I think that's where I would orient myself most. Is before that, it's like, okay, what haven't I done before? But I think we have to have the humility to also think, okay, I may also not be inventing the wheel or anything. It's probably been done before. If you study a bit of film history or whatever, like but I think that's the best way to orient yourself as to what have I done so far.
I think there are two sides of this question. One side is that as a producer, for example, I always feel the responsibility that I have to check the subject, because I think the director doesn't have this responsibility. He or she has to do whatever she or he wants to do. But as a producer, I think I have to check, because especially if you're talking about the documentaries, if this, I mean, the killer sentence would be most probably that it has been done before. So you have to check it. But it's not about like you are doing first time ever on earth this subject, but just like you have to check it, because especially on the documentary filmmaking, we are working on mostly on the contemporary things. So it's nice to check it. But I think the second part of the question is that where you are coming from is like most of the stories, unfortunately, I mean, we are in 2021 and we are talking about the same shit still, but it has been told by men, it has been produced by men, etc. So when you were talking, I just thought like, yeah, that's right. I mean, we always listen the war on the eyes of the men, and even if we are listening or watching it on the eyes, or from the gaze of the woman, it's also most probably told by men. So I think there are two aspects of the questions. One is like you have to check it as a producer, not as a director. But on the other hand, there are still stories that still we are seeing stories from the eyes of the men. So it's important. Doesn't matter if it's war, doesn't matter if it's economics or Middle Eastern politics, doesn't matter. But it has to be. We have to watch more stories from women's eye. And so yes, I think that's why.
And maybe a naive question, but sometimes I get in the mood of thinking, oh, I would like to do a movie on this and that topic. And then I realize the topic is totally interesting and important, but I don't feel that I'm the right person to tell that story, because it doesn't belong to me. Is that also sometimes the case, that you find a topic and you think, it should be maybe tackled, but I can't? And then you have to let go of the topic? Especially with documentary filmmaking, you constantly come up with ideas, because you read newspapers and you think, oh, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, that happened to me recently. Where, I mean, I would differentiate between, I think we have to acknowledge that we live in a, in a neoliberal system, and it kind of doesn't matter where you are in the world, it's the same, it really shifted how culture and film and the arts are funded. And there is like, as Mark Fisher said, we live in a capitalist realism, so we have to, kind of sink or swim. And sometimes I get really conflicted about that, because, of course you want to get funding, but then, do you know which topic's kind of going to get funding, and then do you actually make work you want to make, or you make work that you know that's going to get funded? And I had this experience recently where during the lockdown, of course I lived in the UK for so long, and I lived there during the Brexit referendum. Actually, my degree show opened on the day of the referendum, and it wasn't a great day after. And then before, I didn't really see myself as an other in the UK, because especially, I mean, London is not the UK, but like it's such a diverse city. It's, you know, in so many ways. And then suddenly, already during the campaign, there was a law being set about Eastern European workers coming here to take a job, and there was, you know, there was a law about that. And then during the pandemic, you know, when the UK went into lockdown, I read an article that was saying that there's a big problem because most of the fruits and vegetables are harvested by Eastern European workers, like seasonal laborers that come into the UK to do the harvest and then they leave. And this is not only in the UK, this is many, many countries in Europe. So I started developing a project on that because I was like, oh, this is interesting. So now you can't eat because there are no Eastern Europeans. And I work with a really brilliant Moldavian researcher who I met through another job, and she found someone that was working on one of the farms in the UK, and he started documenting his days with his smartphone. And I thought, oh, this is great. And then I came, well, I didn't come because it was online, but I was invited to Berlinale Talent this year to short form station where I developed it further, which was a great experience. And I thought like, okay, I'm really into something. And then I started to pitch it to, you know, certain outlets in the UK. And then one feedback we got was like, oh, this is interesting. But then we heard that the parents come to the UK and they leave the children alone in their home countries. And this particular platform was like, oh, this is what we would be interested in, which is totally fair enough because, you know, it's their editorial decisions that inform what subjects they want to cover. But suddenly I found myself like just looking at certain charities and like orphanages and like whatever in like Romania and Moldova, and like trying to get access to this particular group. And then suddenly I started to feel like really dirty. I was like, this is not really the, it didn't feel right, you know, like trying to find these poor children were like really suffering and not having an organic connection, just having this, I felt like a little bit like opportunistic idea of about like, okay, then this is the angle what they want, so I must find this angle. And then I kind of abandoned the pursuit of that subject for that reason. But then again, it's very different when I get hired to do something, because then why? So because of the pandemic, there are many of these Western outlets, or like any news outlet really, because there was no travel, they started to hire local filmmakers to cover certain subjects they wanted to have on their platforms, which I think is a really great development. And then, you know, I was actually worked with The Guardian on a documentary that was covering the pedophilia law in Hungary in the summer, which was kind of, it was a very wild law that banned the promotion of homosexuality for under 18-year-olds and called it the anti-pedophilia law and like a child protection law, which is, I mean, just mental. And you know, like I'm a gay woman, so I thought, you know, I'm a right director for this, but I'm starting to have these thoughts like more and more, and I feel like this is something I might not have been so conscious of before.
You want to add something?
Yeah. No, I mean, I was just like, very paying attention to what Noémi was saying now. But like, I think to answer your question, of course, I think as we are all, and this is part of what, you know, I understand myself partly as a documentary filmmaker, and this, of course, we are all interested in all sorts of things, and we're interested in understanding the world and all sorts of dynamics that, you know, that are power dynamics and structures that are underlying, you know, our daily lives, and of course that I think I'm daily confronted with like stuff that we read. It's like, okay, this would be a great film, but then I think this is a question that does come through my mind. Like, okay, am I the right person to tell the story? Right? This is what you were asking, and of course, I don't have an answer to this because at one side I do think, yeah, I mean, everyone should be allowed to tell every story. I think this is how we learn about a reality that is different than ours. Right? That's how we learn to deconstruct certain, you know, patterns, certain biases in our head. That's actually how, you know, through collaboration, through people who are not in your bubble, this is how we could actually overcome certain biases. At the same time, I think we have to. So I think from a moral perspective, sure, we should all be able to tell all the stories that we want to. At the same time, I do think, okay, like from an epistemological point of view, or even from another moral point of view, like would be fair, okay, like if what kind of authority do I have about, or telling the story, or what do I understand about it? Am I able to overcome or to deconstruct certain like some of these biases that do exist, like from, you know, um, maybe many things, but like from my point of view as a cis man, basically, if I'm telling a story that's about queer characters, like for instance, is this it could be fair, but then I have to ask myself the question, like, can I, there may be reasons that I'm the right one to tell the story. I may have a connection to these protagonists, that they may agree to doing so. We may have a connection that might do the film well, but then I have to ask. I think I would have to ask myself these questions: if still would I be the one from this point of view? Like, what can I still bring and offer? And of course, I do believe that it is possible. Like, because if we're also only reducing ourselves to our immediate reality or to our immediate experience, I would only tell even stories about other filmmakers or about my life, and then it becomes to this again, which it becomes almost too individualistic. It's like, okay, I have only authority to talk about my immediate experience, and then we wouldn't learn anything out of it. And I think documentary, part of it is just like there's a wish that we want to learn about people, we want to learn about structures. This, of course, there is a power dynamic in there that we have to learn. Okay, what are the best ways to try to minimize this? But I do feel, I mean, I may not have a ready answer to this, but I want to believe that we could be able to tell stories that we want to, not just about ourselves and about our immediate, our immediate environment.
That's a very interesting point that you make. There is this filmmaker in Germany, documentary filmmaker, Thomas Heise. He's very famous, and he's also teaching at the film university, I think in Vienna. I'm not sure. Don't nail me down on this. But he said to me in a conversation that it's funny when he's teaching people how to do documentaries. He's always telling them, please, don't tell me anything about your grandmother. We all have grandmothers. And it's very interesting. It's a funny sentence, but what I also experience is that what you were saying, we cannot just stay in our own environment, but on the other hand, over the last couple of years, especially in Germany, I've seen more and more documentaries made from exactly this perspective. My family, or how I deal with, for example, the world kind of in this acceleration process. How am I connected to consumerism? And that is exactly that what you're trying to not only have.
And one provocative question, but this could be coming out of a certain fear that we may have nowadays, that we're like of dealing with topics and subjects that are out of this comfort zone, but like we feel that we may not be entitled to, or that we may be just reproducing certain power structures, which might be the case. I'm not saying this. We've all known films that are just like done from a European perspective about something in Latin America or something in Asia and Africa, and they're just like reproducing certain like a colonial gaze. Completely fair, but at the same time, thinking of the other way around, like, couldn't this be when we're just thinking, no, okay, just like I'll just play it safe. I'll just be making films about my grandma, which I love. Like, Noémi made a great film about her grandma. I've made a film about my grandma. So
you can generalize it. No, I know.
There's another one in the pipeline. Sorry.
but you can generalize it. It's just an observation that you do, that young filmmakers start with their own kind of world, and often it's just a cliche. You go far beyond that, as I mentioned earlier on, because you choose different visuals. First of all, but sorry.
No, but this would be my question. Like, I don't have an answer. I'd like to talk to you guys also about it, because couldn't we be out of a certain self-censorship almost, that, okay, it's like, no, I may have nothing to offer to this at all, and I'll just like keep it safe. I'll play it here. I'll do about my own environment, my family, my bubble, my social class, and stuff like this. And then I think aren't we kind of in this way, only once it's a very comfortable position, right? We're not challenging ourselves, and we're not like challenging, I think, these structures, but at the same time, I think maybe some good films could be coming out of it. It's like sometimes we do have as artists also. It's especially in the way we're seeing the world and seeing things that something new may come out of it. So this is I don't have an answer to this, but I do feel like that may be something to do with that we're coming like always too far into this almost neoliberal thinking again. It's like, no, it's just like my view of myself and how I see these and this is a question I'd also like to hear from you guys, basically. Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to try to combine both questions. First of all, as a producer, I'm sitting on a very comfortable zone than the directors, because when it's a commissioned thing, I can just do it and doesn't matter. I'm just putting my name. Sometimes I'm not, so it's easy for me. For a director, it's not. So if you are not into really of the subject, so that you shouldn't do it. I'm 100% sure about this. So I'm talking about the commissioned things. But sorry for being disagree with this German director. I think yes, everyone has grandmothers, and everyone has to tell the stories of their grandmothers, especially in the mainland Europe, I believe. So because if you went back to your grandmothers, it's going to be a huge opportunity for all of us to deal with the past. And all the grandmothers have stories, and I think that's also important, that the word is not coming like grandfathers, but it's coming with grandmothers, because I believe that the common memory is coming through mothers and grandmothers, so it's important to listen to them. That's one of the subjects that we are working on, this Armenia-Turkey cinema platform. And there was this French director, Serge Avedikian, who got the Palme d'Or on short films on 2012 with his film called, how to translate it, The Dogs of Istanbul. He had this sentence, he had this teacher with the puppets, finger puppets, and one finger puppet was an Armenian boy, and the other one was a Turkish girl. And he was telling to these puppets, to the Armenian one, he was telling that, could you please stop listening to your grandmothers? And he was telling to the Turkish one, could you please go and ask your grandmothers what happened? So I think it's very crucial and very important to speak with your families about what happened 50 years ago, about what happened during the Nazi time in Germany, during the Armenian genocide in Turkey, during the Soviet bloc in the Balkans. So it's important. I mean, that's our only source. It's not something that we can go with the history books. And I believe that micro stories, especially told by women in the kitchen, are much more important than these big round tables that we are talking about the Second World War, for example, or the Armenian genocide. So it's important to listen to the grandmothers. And I think, I mean, I cannot generalize, of course, but I believe that the stories mostly are coming for the last, let's say, 30 years, are coming from second and third world, but the money is coming from the first world. And when you are coming, you have great ideas, you have no funding, so that you have to go to Berlin, you have to go to France, you have to go to, I don't know, Sundance, Seance, Maidenboard, whatever. And unfortunately, the stories that you are trying to tell always doesn't have the reaction from the funders, doesn't have the reaction from the festivals. So that you have to be like very patient. You have to like tell your story from like 101 level, and on the other hand, that you have to struggle with the Orientalism. That's what, for example, when you do something about the agriculture, you end up in the orphanages with the boys and girls, and it's like, hello, this is not my story. But that's what people want to see, especially on the streamers and on the TV. And it's like, if you are coming from the second world or third world, like me, it's always like, well, the story is not that much Orientalist, and we are not on the camels anymore, and well, we are not talking Arabic, and I know it's very stereotype, but it's still there. I mean, we are still trying to tell that outside of the first world, there is another world as well, and these people are working there, surviving there, struggling there. And for example, I'm living in Hamburg for 1.5 years almost now, and there's a reality of the Turkish workers in Germany for the last 60 years. It's almost like 4 million people are living in this country, and there's almost nothing done. This is the 60th anniversary, and even in the 60th anniversary, which means on a producer's point of view, you may find money, there's nothing. I mean, these 4 million people are living in this country, no films, no books, nothing. I mean, not nothing, but there are like very, very few so that you can name them. I mean, I can just like tell all the films done about the Turkish gastarbeiters in Germany so that it's a problem. And that's why I believe that's important to go back to the grandmothers, to the mothers, to the fathers, to whoever you can find, and just to talk to them. I mean, the image is very democratized now, so you have iPhones, just record them. You may lose the video at the end, but you may have the sound. So it's the most important part is this, I think. I mean, you don't have to be like this Alexa people. You have this camera equipment. You don't need, I mean, you just go and talk. And then sometimes it may work.
Yeah, and I think it's also just a matter of like discussion, like both in the industry at wide and also just a personal discussion, because I think it's one thing to have any kind of privilege, but then it's another thing being aware of that privilege and maybe using that privilege for the greater good to some extent, because I mean, when you apply for funds, when you approach commissioners, when you work in the industry, you kind of have to use a very middle-class language, right? So, I mean, that in itself can be a barrier for access for people that, you know, don't come from a background that they were allowed that. And I think what's really interesting, and like I'm personally hopeful because, you know, so like if you do psychology, sociology, there are so many ethical guidelines, and like compared to that, like the documentary world, sometimes it's like Wild Wild West. But I feel that there's like greater awareness, but you know, on every level, and I think it's a great initiative to kind of diversify not just the filmmakers, but also decision makers, and the sort of like gatekeeping positions. And then there are like two things I wanted to add to this. Like, I think it really helps if you have any kind of connection to the subject. It doesn't have to be like you are from that particular community. It can be like an emotional connection, like understanding, for example, with me. When I was making this film about a British Muslim mother, I understood what it means to be perceived as other in the UK. So I think to some extent that justified kind of, you know, uncovering this story. But then there's another thing which something I'm personally trying to advocate in documentary. Well, you know, contributors are not normally paid, which is understandable because it just opens up like a lot of ethical complications. But for example, the setup we made in this particular film about the farm workers is the worker who actually filmed for us. He's my co-director, and he wished to remain anonymous for obvious reasons, but we also entered into a profit share agreement, meaning that if the film happens to make any money through distribution or awards, we get an equal share, and this is not something I came up with. Actually, I was inspired by Andrea Luca Zimmermann, who is an amazing German filmmaker that's based in London, and I think she has been doing this for years, and I thought that was a very interesting approach where you actually share the gains of your labor. Oh.
Wow.
Oops.
What's that?
Feedback. It's like enough Marxism on this stage. Sharp.
Okay. We interrupted you in the middle of the sentence.
I'm just mindful it might be censored again. No, but so I was just saying it wasn't something I came up with. Something I found out about from Andrea, and I thought it was a very interesting way to approach something, like, yeah. And then there's just like a closing thought to this, to add to this very far-reaching train of thought, that I'm a big fan of a writer called Edouard Louis. He's a French writer, and his first novel, called The Story of Eddie, was an autobiographical novel, which is about his own experience growing up gay in sort of like rural, working-class France. And then he also wrote a book about, which is more like a personal essay about who killed my father, because his father had like numerous health complications from working in a factory all his life, and how that sort of work kind of broke his back. And there was like a thought in that book that I keep going back to in my head. And it was like the people that actually practice politics, and like the people that actually influence politics, for them it's like a matter of aesthetics, right? But then the people whose life actually like depend on politics and who can be killed by politics, they don't actually get to participate in, in those decisions, although it's a matter of life and death for them. And I thought that's a very interesting point, and something that stayed with me for a long time.
That's very interesting points that you both of you made, that I kind of would like to combine, because you're both in a way talking about class. You said there's no films about Gastarbeiters, and the question is why? Who's deciding that there's no such stories? I can't imagine that no one wants to talk about that. And you just said this small sentence about the funding. You have to use a certain language that certain people don't have.
So sorry, just gonna add something, that you have to know language. Exactly. Not only use the certain language, but you're coming from Africa, you have to speak English. You are coming from Turkey, you have to speak English. If not, you are not allowed.
Yeah, and you have to speak, I would say, a certain kind of English, because, I mean, maybe it's just, I'm just throwing that out now. Most people in the funding system are people from a wealthy background. They studied, their parents studied, they grow with a certain language, and they realize immediately when you don't have that language. So you're out of the system immediately. And I think it's crucial. I mean, we're still in this European kind of perspective. We're not even leaving that, but still we are finding a lot of things that can be told because of the system itself. I think in Germany we have a huge problem that no one from the working class, or mostly not people from the working class, are working within the film industry and telling stories. So the question is, where is the working class? Well, they just don't exist. They don't even know that they can apply for money. I have friends who hide their dialect because they are afraid to not get jobs within the industry. So it seems that class is really crucial, especially in Europe, when we talk about who can tell stories.
The problem, I believe, is also that the funding systems and the festivals somehow forget, I don't know how, but somehow forget that if we don't exist, they don't exist. I mean, if we don't ask funds, so that you are not operating. So the problem is that the funding systems and the festivals don't see us on the same level. The problem is that we are. So if I don't exist and if I don't apply for funds, so that you are not there. So we are equal. But the problem is they are controlling all this amount of money so that they feel that there is no equality. On the other hand, when you are when you are looking from Turkey, for example, in Turkey, film business is a very, very upper middle class profession. You cannot be there. I mean, I'm not talking about the crews, of course, but I'm talking about the directors, scriptwriters, and the producers. You are not allowed to be there if you are not coming from a kind of a support system that you can get from your families. Because if, especially you are in the art house, that makes that you just love what you do, that's why you are doing it, and most probably, let's say 100% almost, that you're not going to earn money from this project. So that somehow you should have a support system, and then you should have someone else or a family member that will support you so that you can survive and doing films. Because in the countries like Turkey, we are not alone, I know, the filming industry, it's not something that the directors, producers, and the screenwriters are paid. Because we are just deferring our money, and most of the time, we're not taking them back. That's why we are doing all these line productions and service productions, so that you have to survive in the company. But it's easy for the producers, but it's not that much easy all the time for the scriptwriters and the directors. So it's an upper middle class profession as well in Turkey, and most probably in the other countries on the region. You have to have money.
Something you want to add?
But I think it also has a lot to do with like how, you know, everything that has been seen as a basic human right, like access to healthcare, education, and housing, has sort of become a commodity. And that's like the very base of the Maslow pyramid. So like if you don't have your basic needs covered, I mean, I'm mainly speaking of the UK and also partly of Hungary, then it's very hard to be creative or kind of, you know, build further on that. But also something I've been thinking about is like, also if you go abroad, then suddenly you became a lot more aware of yourself as the subject that's not from there. And it's something, you know, a lot of, because I lived in the UK for so long, you know, a lot of people that are not from there, they are like, oh, you sound so British. But to them, I don't sound like that at all. And I personally, every time I open my mouth in the UK, I just feel like I sound like Borat, you know, like, hello. So I think that's also very interesting how I suddenly became aware of my own culture being in a different culture. And something I noticed is that also how you, to some extent, the perception of you as this other subject kind of becomes to some extent internalized and like quite performative. And I think I find it at least a little bit hard to like distance myself from that. And also there are like certain trends, like I'm really waiting for the Eastern European Lives Matter movement in the UK. I mean, it's my personal agenda, because then if you look at, for example, the representation of, I mean, I think even the term Eastern European is problematic, but if you look at the representation of people from that particular region, you know, it's very, you know, they're like the prostitute or the cleaner or like the criminal, and there's, you know, you don't really see anything else in the media, and I think that's also, you know, something that's quite problematic and something I wish, you know, I wish that would change. And there's currently, I don't think there's like so much reception for that change in the industry at large in the UK, although there's been a few films when, you know, they've like God's Own Country, I think is a brilliant film. And I think it did do a lot for that, having a Romanian subject with a love interest of an English farmer. And it's a beautiful film. So I think that's also, you know, something to explore of like, yeah, what happens with this quite internationalized subjects outside of their home countries, and how, you know, that can also get quite complicated, but on a personal level and on sort of like, you know, industrial level.
So I would like to open up to the audience. Maybe you have questions, or you have answers to questions that came up here, or you just want to add something, maybe from your own experience, because you're all, or some of you are filmmakers. Yeah, please. Wait a second. We have to give all of you a mic once you have a question, because
nice.
we record this. So.
Yeah, actually, this came up at my school as well, Film Academy Baden-Württemberg. a few times, and like just hanging out at a bar or just talking about the kind of works that were presented at the end of the semester. And I had this talk with quite a few people that the wealth of the student body, like the general wealth of like being supported by your parents or having financial support from any sort of other source, reflects itself in the work, because very few movies were actually concerned with the topic of financial struggle. So a lot of both in terms of fictional work, also documentary work, they were all very, this is about feelings, this is about emotions, this is about like also like political stuff like sexism, gender, racism, but very few were actually about the protagonist struggling financially. And I noticed that over time, because like like when you spend 3 years at the film school and you suddenly realize I maybe saw one movie at best that where the main topic, or like even not even the main topic, where the character was like, shit, I don't have money for this. And that was very interesting to observe, and it was actually very sad to observe that there was an entire like a giant topic that millions of people struggle with every day, that is just not reflected in the work of my school. And I include myself in that because I did also contribute to that, because like I haven't actually made movies about a financial struggle. So like I'm very much included in that observation. But it was just very interesting to see, and I hope I can change it in the future. But yeah, so the class struggle is real in the film business.
And it's also interesting what kind of images arise about this topic. When I see, again, it's a German perspective, because it's the only, or the perspective that I know best. When I see German films and the way they portray poverty, it's almost every time a cliche. It's reduced. And I wonder, why are we not kind of finding new or different images that display this topic in a way that is kind of how it actually is?
And another thing that I realized was not only in film student, but just generally in a lot of the basic look of any apartment in any movie is always like a, like kind of a loft. And I was like, who the fuck lives like that? And you can also see that a lot, like in interviews and stuff. Like the background image, the default background image is always like a very, very upper class, rich living room kind of situation. Unless you're interviewing someone who's, I don't know, like not from Europe, and then suddenly it's always like, I don't know, like some sort of corporate or whatever. So.
Yeah, and then on the other hand, you have pictures of poverty where people live in flats that look like they were places that were completely destroyed. But this is also an extreme way of thinking. No, that this is not poverty. Struggling, it's pornography in a way. Thank you very much. More questions or comments?
Sorry, do you mind if I?
What?
Do you mind if I add something to that?
No, absolutely, please.
I think what's also forgot, I think it's also totally legit to have these discussions with decision makers, which is something before I thought I thought if I say the wrong thing, I'm just going to be cancelled, no more funding, nothing. But then actually something where I realized that if you're in the room, and it can mean, in terms of like the film school or like a festival or, just even working in the industry, you can have those discussions with decision makers, and it's totally fine to challenge them to some extent, because, for example, in the UK, I had this discussion with Doc Society, which I think they handle the documentary funding from the British Film Institute, and they are like, I think they are some brilliant people that work there. And I think sometimes it might be just, it's something they have never thought about because it's not within their personal realm of experience. And I did ask them, I was like looking at the slate, I don't see so many documentaries being funded in the UK about Eastern European experience, although you cover a lot of other minority groups in your funding decisions. And I was just like, why is that? And they actually said, oh yes, we are aware of that. And actually now we commissioned these 3 or 4 films through different programs that actually look at that. And I thought that's pretty cool because, I was so scared to bring it up, for example, but then, you can actually have a conversation and it's fine. And it's, unless you're being super rude, I think it's, but even being rude sometimes is totally fine. But it's you can have those conversations, I think, and it's something I wasn't really conscious of before. And I think it's also important to have those conversations.
Are there more questions? Then I would like to, because we're sitting on a festival. We're talking about the festivals. So I was wondering, maybe it's a very big question, but in general, I was wondering, so what is the role of festivals in this? There's people who want to do certain topics, the directors, there's producers who choose these topics. Then they have to get the funding for these projects. There's a gatekeeping process going on, as you mentioned, that can sometimes be problematic because things get excluded. We elaborated that a little bit with social origin and class. So on the end of this line, there's the festivals. What kind of role do they play from your perspective? What gets chosen? What doesn't get chosen? What's your experience when you are navigating through a festival? What's the things you see? Is there something kind of maybe missing for you, or some things that kind of come up all the time?
Yeah, I think, will depend also on the festival. Like we were just discussing that also festivals who, if they define themselves as political or not, or to what extent. But it is interesting. I mean, part of it, I don't know, from my experience, it both is just like having a film at a festival, but also just visiting a festival, going to films at a festival. And I think there's something that does happen, and and I understand why, and it's important because it's like a showcase of films from around the world of that time, and they're all like mostly trying to deal with and process certain topics that are contemporary, that are topics we're trying to grasp or with as societies in the moment, right? And also understand that part of decisions, which films get selected and even get awarded at festivals, it also plays a role, right? Like it plays a role who's in the jury, plays a role at what's going on in the moment. A good example is even the Berlinale, like, or 2015, at the height of what became known as the refugee crisis in Europe. Basically, there was like a film like Fukumari was awarded at the Berlinale. I can understand why everyone was paying attention to that film and why that film came in the right time. And there's like lots of discussions as to, okay, if that film is like, it's a very interesting film for many reasons, and I do like Gianfranco Rossi. It's not even about the quality of the film at the moment, but it's just about, okay, it's a festival that says, a festival that has like a very clear mission. We're showcasing works from all over the world, like different gazes at contemporary issues, and then at one point there's also, okay, we're trying to process this together, like collectively as society. If I think that's when many festivals try to do, or will say that they're like trying to do, and I think it's an attempt at kind of like a showcase to. That's the impression I get, but I would like to hear from you as well, both as a spectator and filmmaker.
Well, on the producer side, of course, it's not only like meeting with the audience or it's being selected to the festival, but also it's a financial thing. So because it's if once, I mean, for us especially for the ones who are doing art house documentaries and art house films, it's mostly your only area that you will show what you did, and then maybe there you can go to the streamers or wherever. So if you are not selected to any of the festivals, so that you have kind of a film that you don't know what to do with. I had this biennial project for Istanbul Biennial once. I said, I'm going to make a kind of a round trip around the world with the rejection letters that we had from the festivals, because we are just having a round sometimes. One of the films that I did in 2014, we started the applications with Cannes, and we had a full tour, and then it was selected to Berlinale. So it was like, but we sent the film to every single festival that you can think about. And it made a full tour. And I was like about to, I'm just going to put it online, and whoever wants to watch it can watch it there. And then it opened in Berlinale in 2016, and it had a great tour of festivals during 2016. But the previous year for me was just like, just put it online and everyone see it. But yeah, I believe, and that was a film about the cleaning ladies, so it was a class film. But on the other hand, the year of 2015, for example, and when you are coming from 2015 to 2017, it's like, Gianfranco Rossi was in Berlinale, then we had all these refugee films in 2016 and 17 on the festivals. Ai Weiwei was in Venice in 2017. So it was a kind of a wave of the refugee films, and which will, I think, still continue for another couple of years. But yeah, we know that if you have this subject, so that you have a chance. But on the other hand, sometimes I had this feeling that they may be bored of seeing these poor people trying to pass the Aegean Sea, and most of them are dead on the way. So, because I think, on the other hand, the audience and the festivals, as you mentioned, is middle class. And middle class usually doesn't like to deal with the reality. And it's easy for them to see the poverty of the other and to be sad for them. But when these people are in their country, things changes. That's why, for example, for me as well, Rossi's film was very important, these Italian grandmothers and the families, and it's like, it's nice to see on the screen, but when they are next to the movie theater with you, the Syrian refugees, so it's like a little problematic. They were like crying here in the theater watching the film, but when they face with them in the real life, it's little difficult. So I think that there is a kind of an end for this, let's say, refugee and poverty films. But when you look at on the larger perspective, that the festivals, we cannot survive without them. That's the reality. And the problem is that they know it. So you have to be there, you have to push, and so that the journey has to start, because if not, it's going to be a kind of a home screening with your friends. So you have to show it somewhere. Maybe with the pandemic and with the streamers, things will change, which I'm not sure. But for example, I don't know how it goes in Germany. For example, in Turkey, Netflix started to buy unexpected films for their library because they're out of content. People finish the content in Netflix, and then they need new contents, and normally they don't do this kind of films. But as they don't have, for example, enough Turkish language content, they just started to buy films, which will help us, of course. But I don't know how it will, because for me it's a supermarket, so you don't know where it is, and so but it's nice. They started to buy. Normally they wouldn't do it, but we'll see. I don't know. I really don't know what's going to happen in the coming years. And the other problem, maybe you are also facing it. Because of this 2 years pandemic period, all the festivals has like 3 times more films that they usually has, and we don't know what these films will be done as well. Because the festivals doesn't have that much rooms for the films, and they have 3 times more films. So,
in my experience, it's a little bit random, because when I made this film in 2016, which is now here in Interfilm, the grandma film, and I thought, oh my God, I was like, I happy I made it and I graduated and everything. It's like no one is going to watch it because it's like 15 minutes. It's a single take in a flat and like there's so much talking in a foreign language, and like and the grandma and like alcoholism, mental health. I don't know, and anything you can imagine. Um, and then that film got picked up by Rotterdam, and I was like, that's something that happened very randomly because the school sent it to them. I didn't even know because normally they don't really get involved in that. And then before Christmas, I got an email from Julian Ross, who's one of the shorts programmers at Rotterdam, saying, "Oh, I want to invite your film to Rotterdam," and I was just like, "What?" So I think I think it's a bit random, at least in my experience. And I'd like we actually with the farm worker film, we decided to just cut the material he shot over these weeks on the farm, and like I was really confident. I was like, this is such an ITFA film because it's like observational doc, but then there's all of these like political elements, and like it's something that's very hard to get access to because they all have to sign NDAs who work on the farms because they treat it so horribly that this is how like the farm owners cover themselves. It's it's very hard to get inside that world. And yeah, and then it was just like thank you but no. So I don't know. It's almost like ancient Rome when they were trying to predict the future from the passing of birds. But then it's also really nice to kind of develop relationship with festivals. And then there's another thing that I think in some ways the pandemic has helped. It was all online because I find that depending on where that given festival is and how is their budget, like in the UK, a lot of festivals sadly don't get enough funding, especially outside of London, to kind of be able to afford, like accommodation and so on for the filmmakers. So then again, like the first time I went to Sheffield Doc Fest with a film, I mean, I was just going to Tesco and like buying reduced like triangle sandwiches because I was a student and I was broke. And then it was so weird because then in the evening you go to all of these free parties, and I went to the BBC party, which was in a cathedral, and I was like, what is life? So I think there is that. And I think in the pandemic, in some ways, that made it more democratic, although it's very strange to be drinking in front of a computer screen for 5 days in a row. But then there's also, there's another thing that the only thing that's visible is like the success in like some people's careers, and like I wish there was like more transparency about people's journey, especially like this kind of selections and the labs and the festivals and so on, because it's not so transparent. And I think that really helps when you know about that. Like for example, I applied to Berlinale Talents 4 times, and the first time I applied I was on the waiting list, and I was like, oh cool, and then got rejected 3 years in a row. And the last time they rejected me was like the day after Boris Johnson got elected, so I was just like really angry. And I decided to send this email being like, I don't understand you guys. Like I was on the waiting list for 2016. I made so many things since then. I was like, why am, what's going on? And then they invited me the next year when I applied for the 5th time. Like,
Did you send the email? No.
I did.
You did?
I did, but I was so ashamed. I was just like, and then when I actually met them, I was like, sorry about the email. But I think it probably went to someone's junior inbox because they were like, okay. But yeah, so I think it's also important to be transparent about that. And actually at Berlinale Talents there is oh God, I can't remember her name, but like she's got a feature film that just I think also came out in cinemas in Germany called Quo Vadis Ida. Like she was talking she was talking about when she made her first feature, it got rejected by Berlinale. And then she was like, how could they reject this film? It's so good. So like, she's cool. So she sent like a letter, or like I called the director of Berlinale, and I think she essentially went like, are you crazy? How can you not invite my film? And then it actually ended up, I think, the opening or the closing night film. So I thought that's pretty cool because.
And then she was the jury of the Berlinale,
no,
right?
this year,
the
yeah.
next edition.
So
I
it's
mean,
all breakdown.
But you're completely right, because usually we're always used to being on stages and talking about our successes, but like that's just maybe 5%, 10% of it.
Yeah.
If we're being generous, because mostly it's just like, yeah, it's rejection, failure. Yeah. And what is not? I always say, like, what is really the role of the, like, I think like being a director or studying directing is really 90% of the time just like writing exposés and trying to convince people why they should like, and motivate them. It's like, yeah, why our project is great, basically. And it's like maybe 5% you're shooting and 5% you're like post production, but the rest is just like sitting in front of a screen desperately.
Like nobody wants your film to exist. I mean, maybe your producer if you're lucky, but like sometimes not even that. But like, you know, I think that's what it is when you originate projects. Like nobody in the world wants that to exist apart from you, and I think that's yeah. Sometimes that can be a bit. Yeah.
That's what they don't tell you at the panels.
Yeah. Sorry. It's also great. Berlin is nice.
I was especially interested in this question because, as I mentioned earlier, I'm also a programmer for Filmfest Dresden, for the international competition there, and thinking about this role of the festival that has been changing for the last 20 years, with cinema itself losing its significance for societies. So that does something to the festivals. It was a huge push. It's now like 400 to 450 film festivals in Germany alone. Every week you can attend one. So I was thinking, what's the role now? Looking at my work as a programmer, I watch 2,000 films for one festival, and then I think, oh, there's no films from the African continent. Sad, but let's move on. But I think it's our responsibility as festivals to say, oh, there's this gap. Why is there this gap? Is it just like you said, they just don't apply or submit the film? Is there really nothing? So we have to be responsible and scout in these countries and see what films do they have, what are their stories. For example, Oberhausen is right now doing this project called the Intervention, where they have 6 filmmakers from the African continent, and they present their work, really like several films with an introduction, and suddenly something becomes visible that was always there. We just didn't see it, and I think that's a huge thing to do for festivals.
Let's just don't think big. Let's think very small. The application fees. I mean, even the fees, I mean, of course, it's not easy to tell it in middle of Berlin, where people are getting their salaries with euros. But for example, last year, if I'm not wrong, application to Berlinale was 65 euros. 65 euros now is 1/3 of the minimum salary in Turkey. So I, as a producer, when I do a film, I also think about these applications fees. And for example, I may very easily think that I don't have this 100 bucks to apply to Cannes, so that I'm passing it. And if this is the situation of second world as Turkey, just think about Africa. These people doesn't have money. And I remember that one of the programmers of one of the biggest festivals that I knew for like 20 years now wrote a post on Facebook last year saying that, could you please don't ask me waivers anymore? And I was like, we are not asking waivers from you just because like we don't want to pay this money, but we don't have this money. So this waivers issue is a real problem. So it's not only like an African filmmaker or a Turkish filmmaker or a Kurdish filmmaker cannot reach you personally to show you their films, but even, I mean, in a very first step, these applications fees kills them. I just calculated for a feature documentary, the applications that I did and all these fees was like around 1,200 euros. It's something for us. 1,200 euros is a huge amount of money for Turkey. It may be nothing within a budget of a documentary made in Berlin, for example, but it's a huge amount of money. And most probably, for example, for an African or for a Palestinian director, 1,200 euros, it's unthinkable, so that they're doing their films and you will be never able to see them. Because they don't have enough connections, they don't have network, They don't have, I mean, even I just wrote an email to Berlinale Shorts 2 weeks ago to ask for a viewer. I mean, but because I have to. And for example, this viewer policy should be, I mean, this application fee policy should be discussed, I think, within the country, within the festivals. You cannot ask that amount of, and don't think that it's a small amount, because last year, I think both Berlinale and Cannes are 65 euros. Last year, before the pandemic, not last year, but in 2019, I think, 6,000 something film applied to Cannes, which, I mean, just made the calculation, it's a huge amount of money, so that you can create a kind of a free waivers for some of the countries. If this film is coming from that country, I mean, just look at the world economy. I mean, people from Argentina cannot apply as much as easy as the French people does. So you have to make a calculation, and you are passing, I mean, you have to pass some of the festivals, for example. And maybe that one is the right one for you. And if you are not that much experienced producer, I mean that you don't know the festival world that much good, so you are just missing the chance. And some of the countries, for example, Korea has a great industry, and the state is funding, so the Korean state is organizing screening for all these festivals all around the world. They are flying people there and giving them like hotels and 1 week something, and then they're seeing, programmers are watching the films. Unifrance is doing the same thing. Most probably Germany is doing the same thing, German films. So, and the other countries doesn't have this opportunity. I mean, Israel does, Palestine don't. So somehow, actually, I believe this is the responsibility and the duty of the programmers and the festivals as well. I mean, watching 2,000 films is huge. I mean, once I was talking with the programmers of Venice Days, like 10 years ago, when one of my films was selected there, and I asked, how many films did you watch this year? And it was 2010. And she said, we had 4,000 applications, and there were 3 people only on the programmers. I was like, how did you watch it? And she was like somehow 32x. And normally I also do like this. You cannot watch like 4,000 films, but you have to have maybe more people, and you have to have a kind of a policy for the second world, for the third world, and not only to the focus to the some countries, because I know that it's same for all of us. I mean, if you see a film from Iran, of course you will give more attention, because it may be very interesting, both artistic and political way. But maybe if you see something from Jordan, you may be like, oh, okay, if it is not pushed by the Royal Film Commission of Jordan, of course. But it's like, you have to be like more crowded, you have to be like, I think it's the duty, it's not only the duty of the producer and the director, but also it's the duty of the festivals and the programmers. So sorry, I just put it to your shoulders, but
No, you're right, because now that you say that, I thought, yeah, it's true. Looking at all the submissions, this totally reflects economic situations. You have a lot of films from France.
yeah,
Why?
of course.
Of course.
And also, just in addition, I mean, some of the people are, let's say they have 65 euros, but they don't know the language. How they can apply? It should be easier. It should be like, just send a link. And then you can ask for the further information. I mean, you don't need to have everything on the application, because people doesn't know the language. I mean, it's just a kind of I think, very upper class thing again. So.
And the other side, and then I think we have to come to an end, the other side of this festival thing that I also kind of thought of was, since we mentioned that earlier on, they become more and more political, or at least this is the term, then I always thought, well, how political can they actually be? Aren't there restrictions within the system? Because it's just a thesis, but they get funded by the government. How political can festivals actually be? There's topics that are liked by governments, but there's other topics that might not be so popular because you can get problems. I don't know, but I'm wondering why film festivals, at least in Germany, are not dealing with local issues, for example. No one's talking about poverty. No one's talking about the housing crisis. They just don't care, it seems. Why? So you don't have to answer that. It's just something that I
No,
kind of.
as I spoke, I was just waiting, but okay, so I can say something on the maybe.
Yeah, my question
Yeah.
would just be: isn't how political can they actually be? I mean, come on, there's topics they can't touch. Probably, I don't know.
It's very easy to be to be a cool political festival when you have films from foreign countries. It's very easy. I mean, you can name yourself as a very political festival because you are just having films from Turkey, from Palestine, from Israel, from other countries, but not you. So, and I think, I mean, for me, I mean, private space is political, so everything is political. So it's not that you have to state yourself like as a political festival. But I think when you are in a comfort zone of the European filmmaking business and the film festival business, it's like naming yourself as a political is like having a, I don't know, Jafar Panahi film in the festival, and also having a empty chair for Panahi, so that to show to the world that how political you are.
That's what I was going to say. I think I also go from like I act on the assumption that almost everything is political, or every decision we make in the world is a political decision, and then regardless of if a festival defines themselves as political or not, they're making political decisions just by choosing which films are selected or not, or just by in the end which films are going to be awarded. And every decision is political. It's all a lot of calculus there as well. Just like, okay, you know, why we. And for instance, a good example, it's the Doc Leipzig, I think 2017, when there was the whole, which is also could make a whole panel only about that, but it was that film Lord of the Toys, a German documentary about this like far right kind of scene between like among teenage gamers. And then it was a film that was very polemic. There were like screenings who were kind of like sabotaged by people who said it's a film who was not being critical enough. It's just like observing this reality of these people, but not really. That was the criticism, right? Not saying I agree with it, but there was like unreflectedly kind of portraying these things and or like these people, and the films should be sabotaged. And there was like huge discussions as to like what the film was doing, if it was right or not to portray it like this. And then in the end, the festival gave the film the award, like the Golden Dove, which was a very political decision in a way. It was not even, in the end it didn't become, and I think for every jury is also making political decisions as to why will they award this film at this moment. It was the example with the Berlinale. So I think every festival is doing politics, whether they will admit it or not. And I think that's just how it is. It's not only about it's not only about discussion of the aesthetical qualities of a film. Everything there is also, you know, it's political, and by that not mean just like very explicitly political themes, but you know, from the selection process to the awards and everything, and the people who are invited and stuff like this. This is all for me. Yeah, it's politics.
You want to add something?
No, just a quick. Well, I was thinking. Well, I think what would be, I think, quite important to kind of not have like this entrenched, like sort of semi-feudal systems, like develop and kind of have a rotation in terms of like different gatekeeping positions, and you cannot be the head of the film fund until you're that. You know, like have some kind of diversity also in terms of like how long can you hold a certain position, or like how much effort you put into like trying to reach, you know, regions where there are barriers to access, and I think there's like great many efforts in terms of that, but I think it's also something to be mindful of, that it's also something that you can do within your own, you know, private life. Like you can put it on, I saw someone during the pandemic put on Instagram that, you know, like if you're from a background where you cannot really have access to like filmmaking, you know, like educational tools, or like, you know, you don't have an idea how to start in the business, I can give you mentoring like for 3 people for like half a year, once on a week on Zoom. So I think there's also a lot that, you know, there's this, you know, certain hierarchies, but I think there's also within our own lives where we can make, you know, small differences, and I think it's also good to be aware of that.
All right, we have to come to an end. Thank you very, very much for being here, for sharing your thoughts with us. And thank you for attending this panel. Of course, we only managed to touch the surface of this topic. There's way more to explore. But thanks anyway for being here. Thank you very much.